All right, welcome to Criminal Justice Ethics. The instructors for this class are myself and Aurelio Coronado. You can contact us at any time via email, or usually Facebook Messenger is also good as well. It's an online course. Starting each Monday, students will have 5 days to log in and view online lectures and read the course material that's assigned. Each Saturday there will be a scheduled live question and answer seminar via Facebook. The course starts on January 16th and ends on February 16th, 2017. It's a 1-month long course with 4 weekly lecture topics. The required textbook for the class will be Scientific Forensic Evidence, Evaluating Forensic Experts in the Adversarial System. This book will be provided free to students upon its completion, and select chapters will be given to students free to download throughout the class, so you won't have any problem accessing that material. The course schedule is as follows. Week 1 will be ethics and the value of the professional ethics in the justice system. Week 2 will be ethics for criminal justice students. Week 3 will be ethical issues for forensic examiners. And week 4 will be ethical misconduct for whistleblowers. There is also, after those lectures, a final exam. The requirements for the class are threefold. There's a final exam, a research paper, and discussion questions which have to be attended to every week. You will be graded based on your performance in all 3 things, and your grade will be assigned as A, B, C, D, or F. So this will be like every other traditional class that you've had. The syllabi will be provided to you in Spanish. It contains a lot of this information, so I want you to go over it carefully. I want you to ask any questions that you have after you've read it. Make sure that you contact either myself or Aurelio so that we can address those questions and make sure that you're not misunderstanding what the requirements are. But the bottom line is, every week there's a lecture, there are discussion questions, and there's a final exam, and there's a research paper that's due. The requirements for that are in the syllabi, so please read that carefully and closely. All right? Thank you for listening, and now we'll move on to the lecture portion. What is the value of professional ethics to the criminal justice system? Well, essentially, you cannot function as a member of the criminal justice profession or any profession without some code of ethics, whether you understand it or not. Specifically in the criminal justice system, the problem is one of needing to be fair. Justice requires fairness. If there is no fairness, there is no justice, which means that you have to attend to that issue all the time. You have to make sure that your conduct is unbiased, to make sure that your conduct is ethical, make sure that your conduct is fair. The problem is not everyone understands what that means. But the problem is confounded by the idea that there are also people in the criminal justice system, many people in the criminal justice system, whose conduct is designed not to be fair or just or provide service to the community, but rather to provide service and to benefit themselves or their friends or their colleagues, and in essence be unfair. So, because this has become, well, how do I put this? You can't work in the criminal justice community without encountering ethical issues every single day. Every day you find people who are lying about their resumes, people who are lying about work they did or did not do, people who are lying about things that they said or did not say, and people are misrepresenting the findings of others or the work of others. It's just a constant flow of unethical behavior through and around the criminal justice system. And so if you're actually working in it, it's impossible not to see these issues every day, not to be confronted with them every day, and not to have to work to resolve them in some fashion every single day. Because that's true, and because we found that our students were so unprepared for this reality, Dr. Stan Crowder and I published in 2013 a textbook called Ethical Justice. That will be the source book for many of the ideas and concepts that we are going to talk about in this class. So if you are at all interested in developing a more mature and thorough understanding of ethical issues related to the criminal justice system, whether it be in the United States or Mexico. They're the same issues, the same basic professional issues. This is the book to start out with. And the reason we wrote it, obviously, is because we looked for a reference text that we could use with our own students, and we found the community lacking. We found the publications and the literature severely lacking. There were a lot of good references that were broken up and published in different areas, so we took all those ideas and put them into one spot and combined them with our own case experience and our own advice. But we'll just start by saying this. Every single criminal justice professional needs to have a basic class on professional ethics under their belt. They need to have that. It is an essential requirement so that they understand what the rules are for their professional conduct. Now, this does not mean that taking such a class will make one ethical, because it won't. There is no set of rules that you can write, no laws that you can create, and no punishment that you can deal out that will make people behave ethically. People who are unethical are going to behave that way whether we want them to or not, whether the rules exist or not. So, people of good ethical character will see this, will see the rules that we lay out, will see the notions that we lay out and the advisories that we lay out. They'll see those as a guide, as something that will help them make better decisions and that will help them be a better professional. People who are unethical, who are essentially corrupted in one way or another, they will see these same advisements, these same guidelines and rules as a means, as a way to game the system, as a way to work around the system, as a way of what can I get away with without being caught. And that's essential to character. That's not something we can ever change. As a professional, it's very frustrating to have students that you know you're not going to reach because they're essentially unethical professionals. They're going down at some point. And so I can't help that. I know I've learned that over years, over 20 years of casework and experience in teaching and mentoring. I've learned that there are some people who are beyond help. What I can do is I can help the ones that want to be helped. If you want to be an ethical professional, we can make that happen. We can give you the tools to do that. But if you are not interested in that, there is no rescuing you. And you know what kind of professional you are already. You know what kind of professional you're going to be. Just take a look at what you've done and how you've been. That's who you are. So, having said that, this is where we start. We start with ethical justice, the concept of ethics, fairness, and justice. Now, there are some concepts I think we need to read from this text. Some basic terms and definitions that I think will benefit students. So let's just start out with those basic ideas, basic terms and definitions defined, so that there's no misunderstanding about what these terms mean. Because I want you to have these definitions in your head as we proceed with these lectures. So the first one is due process. What's due process? Due process is the preservation of constitutional and state rights. That's what you're doing. When we're talking about what due process is, it's whether or not your rights have been protected and preserved. All right. If the justice system does not preserve your rights, there is no due process. The next thing is ethics. This is a good one. Ethics versus morality is an important one. Ethics are the specific institutional rules of conduct constructed for morality and other elements of character like motivation, libido, courage, loyalty, integrity, empathy, and they are the result of reflection and deliberation. There are specific rules. That is completely different from morality. Morality is essentially your beliefs and feelings regarding your behavior. What you think is right, wrong, good, or bad. Right, wrong, good, or bad, these are moral things. These are moral considerations. And the specific rules that you have in place in order to make your morality, in order to preserve your morality and your moral integrity, those are your ethics. Now, there are different kinds of ethics. There are personal ethics and there are professional ethics, and we're going to learn the difference and the consequence of the difference this week. Professional ethics are the specific ideals, principles, values, and constraints imposed by the practitioners, by the mandates of their profession and workplace. So it's not just who you are as a person, it is your profession. What your professional organizations, your employer, the rules that they set forth for professional practice in your professional community. That is different from your personal ethics and your personal morals. All right? So let's have that conversation very quickly. Now, let's talk about this. Justice. For there to be justice, this means that there's going to be fair and impartial treatment during the resolution of conflict. If there is no fair and impartial treatment during the resolution of conflict, there is no justice. That's what justice refers to. Fair and impartial treatment. All right? That's generic. Legal justice means this is the result of forging the rights of individuals with the government's responsibility to ensure and protect those rights. So there's not just the concept of fairness and impartial treatment. There's also the idea that the government has a responsibility through the legal process to preserve that fairness, that impartiality. And it's related very much to the idea of due process. This is completely different from the notion of moral justice and personal justice. You may have religious beliefs that dictate a particular moral code or a moral set of justice. Well, essentially, what you believe as a person, what you believe is in your religion, what you believe in your private life, that's one set of values. What is going on in professionally and legally, that is another set of values. And sometimes these are reconciled and sometimes they aren't. And if you choose a profession that is at odds with your personal beliefs, that's going to be a problem. Especially if, because at one point you're going to have to make a choice, and one's going to win out and one's going to lose out, and the inability to reconcile that's going to make you miserable as a person. So, justice, fair and impartial treatment during the resolution of conflict. Legal justice means that you are negotiating within the law to protect the rights of everyone involved. If that's not occurring, then it's not legal justice, it's something else. Moral justice and personal justice, those things have to be off the table. Your morality has to be set aside for what is considered legal justice or professional ethics. For example, this is a well-known judge in the United States, and she was presiding over a trial, and essentially she believed that it was her duty to help the prosecution because she wanted the prosecution to win during this criminal trial. The problem is, and that's a personal belief that she had. So she started texting the prosecutor all the questions they should be asking, the kinds of motions they should be making, so that she could rule on them favorably, because the prosecution wasn't thinking of these things on their own. That is extremely unethical and actually illegal. So she got in big trouble for doing that. The judge is not allowed to pick a side during the legal contest. They're supposed to be a just and fair presider over the law and interpret the law and make sure that all the rules that are in place are attended to, and everybody plays by the law. Everybody conducts himself in a lawful manner. They're supposed to know the rules. They're supposed to enforce the rules, and they're supposed to be fair. The reality is this judge ignored that completely, and she paid the consequence for it. So her personal odds her personal morality were at odds with her professional ethics. This is another judge who, during a criminal trial, began texting the victim. There was a domestic violence case, and the judge started texting naked pictures of himself to one of the witnesses for the defense. Again, completely improper behavior. Personally, you should obviously be allowed to do whatever you want in your private life, but when you're a professional and you're engaged in a legal contest or engaged in a trial, the parties involved have a moral and ethical obligation not to be showing bias or favoritism or generating conflicts of interest, and certainly sending naked pictures of yourself to witnesses, as the judge falls in that category. So again, the personal desires and wishes of an individual overcoming their professional ethics to the detriment of justice, which is a big problem, constant problem. Let's talk again about the difference between morals and ethics. Morals are a huge contributor to the development of ethics, but they are feelings and beliefs. They're not explicit. They are how you feel about an issue, what you believe about an issue as a person, as a human being. All right? That's what morality is. What's right, bad, good, or wrong. Ethics, again, they are the specific institutional rules of conduct constructed for morality and other elements of your character. The other elements of character would be things like motivation, libido, courage, loyalty, integrity, empathy. All these things, your beliefs about these ideas, about these ideals, will help you construct your specific ethical code. The problem is there is a huge difference between what people say and what they do. For example, if you're in law enforcement, you have an obligation to conduct yourself in a particular, have a character that is beyond reproach. You're supposed to be somebody who has a high moral character, someone who is reliable, doesn't lie, who doesn't break the law, who doesn't plant evidence or doesn't show favoritism, but is in fact someone whose character is beyond reproach. So here we have a case involving the sheriff and his detectives and his internal affairs officers at a golf course, and they've got a prostitute on the green with them, and she is sexually servicing them, and they're taking photographs of it and publishing them on Facebook. Now, again, this is one of those issues where personal desire and personal character takes a front seat to ethical responsibility. Again, to the detriment of the people involved. In order to engage in order to be a professional and a practitioner in the criminal justice system, you have an obligation, again, not to break the law, and certainly not to flout it in front of everyone. And this becomes the problem. The problem is that those people who are in charge of enforcing the law, or in charge of presiding over criminal trials, or participating in criminal trials, they see themselves often as above that, and they let their personal needs, desires, and beliefs dictate their behavior rather than attending to their professional ethics, because they think they're not going to be held accountable. And that's what it comes down to. It comes down to accountability. We'll talk more about that. So, what are professional ethics? The specific ideals, principles, values, and constraints imposed on practitioners by the mandates of their professional workplace. So important. There are a lot of people in the criminal justice community who believe that it's only unethical if you get caught. And that is simply not how it works. Ethics exist whether someone is watching or not. And the reality is, you have to accept that someone's always watching. So there's always some sort of record of what's going on. Whether you want to believe that or not, it's proven to be true over and over again. So the reality is, you can't actually escape this notion of ethics, not in the criminal justice system. There are constant choices you're going to have to make, constant ethical dilemmas you're going to face, and if you do something unethical, it's very likely that if not now, later you will be caught, identified, or reported. So one of my favorite TV shows, and one of my favorite quotes from that show is the TV show Serenity. The quote is, "If you can't do something smart, then do something right." And that's because very often the right thing to do is not necessarily the one that's going to continue your employment or continue your associations. We hear this phrase bandied about a lot, the phrase ethical dilemma. An ethical dilemma is not when you have when you're choosing whether or not to behave ethically. That's not what it means. An ethical dilemma is when you have two choices and both of them do not allow for an ethical outcome. All the choices are equally undesirable, and they all violate personal or moral or professional codes of conduct, or the law even. So an ethical dilemma means you have a choice, and either way you choose, it's wrong. And there's no right choice. For example, whether or not to accept a bribe or inducement. This is not an ethical dilemma. This is clearly wrong to accept a bribe. There is the ethical option. The ethical option is not to accept it. That's what it comes down to. There is no ethical dilemma there. The ethical option is quite clear. Very often, for example, law enforcement are given consideration or inducements at different establishments for food or for drink or for activities they can participate in. There's like a big law enforcement discount that's offered. Law enforcement have an obligation to turn that down, because in most cities, most states, the law is very clear. They are not allowed to accept those inducements. It's actually considered a form of a bribe, and so they're required to pay full price. Anyway, so there's no ethical dilemma here. If someone offers a law enforcement officer 25% off of a meal or something like that, they're supposed to say no. It's very simple, very straightforward. So, being offered sex for protection. This is not an ethical dilemma. Again, this is clearly wrong. There's so many instances of law enforcement officers working privately and taking sex in exchange for different services, different considerations. It's always wrong. When someone tries to get out of a traffic violation or some sort of traffic crime with us, the intention of giving us a sexual favor, that's always wrong. There's not an ethical dilemma. It may be that the officer wants to do it, but that doesn't make it right. That doesn't make it okay. For another example, somebody steals money from the crime scene. Somebody steals drugs from the crime scene, or belongings or valuables from the crime scene. Very often, maybe like a cell phone. The cell phones go missing from the crime scene. The officer knows who took them. It's not an ethical dilemma. There's only one option. You have to report that. You have to tell somebody. You can't keep it to yourself, and you can't participate in it. So there's no ethical dilemma there. The problem is many people who are involved in these kinds of things, they see that, and they think, well, I have an ethical dilemma. If I report it, I'm going to get fired, or I'm going to get my friend fired. That's not an ethical dilemma. There is no ethical dilemma. The right answer is quite clear. You have to turn them in, you have to report them, and you have to take the consequences for that. So this is another one that's come up in the United States many times. Whether or not to have sex with a prostitute to make an arrest. In Hawaii, it is legal for the officers to have sex with prostitutes and then make an arrest afterwards. And in other jurisdictions, there are unwritten policies where it says it's okay for officers to have sex with prostitutes before they arrest them. Now, what's interesting about that is that very often this is not publicly known. This is not something that is publicly spoken about. And there have been officers who have been fired for reporting these internal policies and making them public because they didn't want to participate, or they got caught, or and were being charged criminally or something like that. In essence, what I always wonder about is what do the wives think? What do their wives and girlfriends think about this particular practice? And do they find it acceptable? And I find that very often the wives don't have any idea, and really often don't want to know. So this is a famous case here in the United States involving a police officer who was Trooper of the Year in the great state of New Mexico, and he wound up thinking that he was going to be able to have sex with a prostitute secretly. So he drove her out into the middle of nowhere next to a gate out on off of a main road. But this gate had a motion-sensitive camera on it, so every time that they would do anything, it would take a picture. So there's a picture of him in his uniform having sex with a prostitute on the hood of the car, and the owner of the gate took this and sent it to the paper and made it public, and eventually the officer was fired. Now this is very similar to what happened in Mexico. Obviously, we had a very similar event, and this is Madeira Garcia, I believe is her name, and she was an officer, I believe, in Leon. I can't remember the exact place, but she took a bunch of pictures of herself naked in her police uniform, or half naked in her police uniform, and sent them via Snapchat to someone else, and they published them, made them public. She was someone who I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe she was a exotic dancer or stripper prior to being law enforcement, which is not a problem per se. But the reality is you can be fired. You can be fired and criminally charged if you have sex in uniform, because personally it's okay. It may be okay for you to take pictures of yourself naked and send them to your lover or your husband or to other people, and that's fine. That's a personal value. Nobody has a problem with that per se. But if you do it while on duty, or if you do it in uniform when you're in law enforcement, you can be fired, you can be criminally charged. And I believe she resigned during the investigation to avoid criminal charges in jail. So while personally it's not an issue, professionally it becomes an issue. And this is one of those areas where personal and professional values compete, and when the professional values are given a back seat to personal desires, very often mistakes are made. So let's continue talking about some of these more general. We'll continue this in just a moment. Let's have a conversation about why ethics are necessary, what their value are. Why bother to be ethical? It's a big pain for some people. For some people, being ethical is not second nature, and it requires a lot of work, and they often find themselves wondering why they bother. Well, there's some very obvious reasons why, and we just talked about one of them, which is employability. The more ethical you are, the more likely you will be able to get employment. The less ethical you are, the more likely you are to be employed by a place that is equally unethical, and that's just as bad. So the first thing is it makes you more employable. You are more desirable as an applicant if you have an ethical character. That's the first thing. The next thing is you'll be preparedness. And by that we mean that you're going to have ethical conflicts that arise all the time, whether they're ethical dilemmas or ethical choices or situations you may not understand have an ethical consequence. You're going to be more prepared to recognize those and reconcile those in your professional career than someone who is not ethical, who has not studied ethics, and who is not following their professional ethical code. So not just that you'll be able to get a job, but you'll be more prepared once you have that job to behave in a fashion that is ethical. You'll be more prepared to recognize those ethical pitfalls and avoid them. All right? So that's not a small thing. To be able to see the landscape in front of you, the ethical landscape in front of you, and to be able to navigate it successfully without falling into a trap. All right? Not everybody's going to be able to do that. You're going to meet professionals around you all the time who are falling into ethical traps because they just don't see them, or they just don't see them as problems. They're only thinking about what's right in front of them right now. They're thinking about the immediate gain rather than the long-term consequence for their behavior. And this will prepare you, getting training and education in ethics, and being an ethical person and an ethical professional will prepare you for these circumstances and provide for your long-term employment and survival as a professional. The next thing is, and this cannot be undervalued, that is trustworthiness. Your only value to the criminal justice community, to society, is your trustworthiness. If you do not have a trustworthy character, you have zero value. You cannot write reports that can be believed, you can't give testimony that can be believed, and your findings will constantly be challenged and questioned no matter what they are, because you have not got that trustworthiness, that history, that established history of being ethical, understanding ethical situations, and making ethical choices, making good choices. If you're constantly making bad choices, if you're constantly doing unethical things, that's going to come up, and that's going to erode any confidence that anyone might have in your ability to render solid opinions or reliable opinions or give reliable evidence of any kind. So that's a big one right there. How do I put this? You'll be more trusted by coworkers, supervisors, colleagues, juries, judges, all your fellow professionals in the justice system, and that's the goal. That's what you want. You want to be trusted. So to be trusted, you have to be trustworthy, and that means behaving ethically and letting people see you do it, so that they know that you can be relied upon to make good choices. So that when you bring them a finding or give them evidence or write a report, they know that it can be trusted. They might still check, but they know that it's going to be okay. There are going to be plenty of times when they don't check, and if you're known to lie, they're going to check every time, and they're going to be constantly looking to trip you up. So the secret is to this kind of longevity is to trustworthiness. The secret to trustworthiness, to being trusted, is to not be a liar. Be a truthful person, be an ethical person, be an ethical professional, and you will develop a reputation for trustworthiness, which will carry you through to every phase of your profession. I cannot stress how important this is, because as one of my mentors once told me, it takes 20 years to build a good reputation for trustworthiness and only about 20 seconds to destroy it. So that's a trap you want to avoid. here's the fun part about that, though. You're not going to be liked for it. If you are an ethical professional, you will not be liked very much. People will not like it. But they will trust you, and they will respect you. And that's more valuable than being liked. Because the moment that somebody gets in real trouble, they're going to be coming to you first, because you're the one who's going to give them the most valuable and ethical and honest appraisal of their situation. You're going to be the one they can trust, even though you might not be the one that they like. So that's the next thing. But the next thing is the more interesting thing is behaving in this fashion makes you more resistant to serious corruption. Just the little things, like not taking free coffee, not always making sure that your time card's right, always making sure that you're telling the truth on little things, making sure that you're always reporting things that need to be reported to the proper authorities, making good choices as a professional, conducting yourself with honesty and integrity. When something serious happens, when there's a serious issue of, somebody wants you to take a bag of money or take a bag of evidence or take or hold something for them that's illegal, or remove something from a crime scene, or give an opinion or a finding that's not true, you're going to be much more resistant to it because you have the practice. For example, I am continuously asked by attorneys to, I wouldn't say lie, but to help shape my opinion towards a legal conclusion. And I always stop them right in their tracks. I say, look, if you're going to get bad news, you're going to get it from me first. I'm going to tell you where the weaknesses are in your case and where the strengths are in your case. I'm not going to lie to you. And I'm not going to lie in the evidence. I'm not going to try to shape it a particular way. I'm going to tell you what you maybe don't want to hear. And that will have more value than being dishonest and trying to, basically being a whore and taking money to give a particular finding that's helpful to a client. And what happens is, over time, people respect that. People gravitate. And when you'll develop for me, I developed a client base that's essentially people who want the truth, who want the facts, and who try their cases based on the facts. I don't get called anymore by attorneys who are looking for whores, people who are just going to give an opinion for money. I don't get called by those people anymore because they know I won't do it. And that is it's as much a habit of mine as it is a practice and a value. It's how I practice that's how I run my practice, and that's widely known. So there have been many opportunities for serious corruption that have arisen, and all of them easily ignored or thwarted because that's just not my habit. Now, if I was in another habit, that would be a big problem. And there are plenty of experts, plenty of forensic scientists working for the state and for the defense that are ethically challenged in that way. For example, recently, let's go here to Facebook. I'll show you. I posted an article on Facebook about a finding that occurred in Orange County, California, and essentially, this is a case that goes back quite a few years, but it involves social workers lying about evidence, hiding evidence, and giving false testimony in court. And they claimed in court that the reason they did this is because they didn't know it was wrong. They didn't know it was wrong to give false testimony. They didn't know it was wrong to hide evidence and lie about it because they thought that was okay. These are grown people in court saying this under oath, that they thought that it was okay to lie under oath. The judges rejected that claim across the board. And this is a proposition, this is a notion that they've been arguing, that these social workers in Orange County, California have been arguing for the last 10 years or more. And they've been doing it on hundreds of cases over the years. The problem is that, well, obviously it's a problem that they lie about it, but the reality is the character of that organization was so permissive, and they had so little understanding of ethics and ethical principles, that this kind of thing was allowed to not only occur, but then as new people came in, they became infected by the leadership, and they became infected with these ideas, and they perpetuated these ideas. So their resistance to serious corruption was eroded by practice and by a lack of overall institutional integrity. And that brings us to the final point, which is that if you have these as a personal value, as a practice in your personal professional life, you are going to preserve yourself. You're going to protect yourself from attacks or from attempts to infect you with other people's lack of ethical character. People who have low ethical character, who are constantly lying or making things up, who are constantly faking evidence or stealing evidence or stealing valuables from crime scene, or who are engaged in improper relationships with people in their workplace or with victims or that sort of thing, that permissiveness is potentially infectious. As you see people doing it, you start thinking it's okay to do it yourself. If you see leadership doing it, you start thinking it's okay to do it yourself. It's not. It's never okay, and it always comes back on someone. So the point being, by engaging in this behavior, in ethical behavior, you protect yourself just by virtue of habit from being infected by other people who are less ethical than yourself. And that is it's not a small thing. You are also, if you submit to a ethical code from, like, say, a professional organization or from a good employer who's got a good ethical code, if you put yourself under the protection of that, you can protect yourself from people who would try to seduce you into doing it by saying, look, I'd love to help you, but that's a violation of my ethical code. I can't do it. So if, let's say you have an employer and they come to you and say, we need you to give this finding. And you're like, well, the evidence doesn't support that finding. And they would say to you, well, we are ordering you to do it. And then you can go right to your professional organization's code of ethics and say, look, I have a professional organization I belong to, and it says that I'm not allowed to falsify evidence. And therefore, if I do that, I can be expelled. And my only value to you as a professional is that I have many good professional credentials, including my membership in this organization. So therefore, to protect this institution and to protect myself, I can't do that. Otherwise, if I do it, then I have to make disclosures, and then everybody gets in trouble. So it becomes in effect a potential shield against being asked to do unethical things. Like, for example, I had a colleague of mine who was told to make an arrest, and he's like, well, the evidence isn't there to make the arrest. And the boss told him, you are going to make the arrest. If you're going to make the arrest tonight, we'll let them sort it out tomorrow. It's not your problem that you didn't do it. He goes, well, if you want to arrest him, you put your own name on it, you arrest him. I'm not arresting him, because if I do it, I'm going to get in trouble. And so his involvement in the professional organization gave him the strength of numbers outside the organization to make an ethical choice, because he knew he wasn't by himself. He knew that he was standing as part of a ethical community with a strong code of ethics that would stand up behind him should he suffer institutional consequences for failing a illegal or unethical order. So it's not these things are not small, and they exist for a reason. I want to close by saying that when you're engaging in ethical behavior, I have found that most people know the difference between ethical and unethical behavior. They know it. They know the difference between right and wrong, good and bad. They know these things. But they lack the formal structure to defend themselves when they feel like they're by themselves, when they feel like they're alone. So the purpose of joining a professional organization, the purpose of joining becoming part of a profession as opposed to an isolated practitioner, is that you get that strength in numbers. You get that you have other people to talk to, so you're not by yourself, you're not alone. That's the reason why we have these lectures, and that's the reason why we write textbooks and we have professional organizations, so that employers and institutions and governments don't press down on individual practitioners and try to get them to conform for fear of losing their professional identity. It still can happen, and it is especially to professionals who have a long history of unethical behavior. But the important thing is to develop a habit of ethical practice, to develop a reputation for ethical practice, so that you can be trusted, and then resist all those efforts to seduce you over to serious corruption, like planting evidence, stealing evidence, faking evidence, giving false testimony, lying about your resume. And then you will be preserved as a professional that will have a long career. The point is to have a long career that is worthy of service and that can have a positive impact on the justice system, as opposed to being someone who just enters the profession and takes what they can get while they can get it, and then winds up getting fired for things that either they did or did not do. I want to close just by saying that the ethics are not a simple issue. They're not uncomplicated. They can be very complicated and very messy. But typically, the correct course of action is not unclear. Typically, the correct course of action, however, is more difficult, and it will make you less popular among your contemporaries, because you will find that ethical practitioners are generally in the minority. So be prepared for that. One of my colleagues once put it much better than I did one time. She said, if you're going to be ethical, be prepared to be alone. And that can be true. So just be prepared for that. But also, in being alone, you will still be employed. You will be employable, and you will have the respect of your true peers. So with that, I can't wait to hear what questions and thoughts that you have for this week's seminar on Saturday. All right? Take care.